Waiting to buy a home? The Churchill Mortgage team says now is a great time to buy. Waiting could be a costly mistake because when rates drop, new home buyers will flood the market, driving up home prices. Go to churchillmortgage.com for your free analysis and see how home values can outpace rates to help you build wealth over time faster. This is a paid advertisement. NMLS ID 1591. NMLS ConsumerAccess.org. Equal Housing Lender. 1749 Mallory Lane, Suite 100, Brentwood, Tennessee 37027. Waiting for mortgage rates to drop could be a costly mistake. Once rates drop, new home buyers will enter the market and prices will soar even higher. At Churchill Mortgage, you can get a free analysis and learn how to avoid the trap of waiting for interest rates to drop. Buy now and refi later at churchillmortgage.com. This is a paid advertisement. NMLS ID 1591. NMLS ConsumerAccess.org. Equal Housing Lender. 1749 Mallory Lane, Suite 100, Brentwood, Tennessee 37027.
Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibuyers, happy Monday. Hope you're having a really, really good day. And so real quick, just now saw this trailer for a new documentary on Netflix about Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell. It's called Sins of Our Mother. It premieres September 14th. It seems like Colby has worked with them on this. It sounds to me, by looking at the trailer, he is sharing some jailhouse calls that he had with Lori. I saw a couple of clips I've never seen before. So that looks like that's going to actually be really good. So Netflix, September 14th. We'll talk about it once it hits. And anyway, so had an amazing time at the Roger Waters concert, guys. Got my shirt on. It was super special for me and Taylor. And it was one of those where my kids always say core memory unlocked when it's something super memorable. And she said that, and that she would remember that night forever. So score, great concert. Love Pink Floyd. Roger Waters was brilliant. Music fact of the day before we get started. And this kind of goes back to something I told you guys last week about me singing the song Physical in children's church, in a Baptist church, by the way. That song was actually banned from several radio stations in Utah for being more suggestive than most songs. So I had no clue at 7 years old what she was talking about. I thought she was talking about getting in shape. So anyways, today, actually, we are going to take a small break from the mega series and update on some Kaitlin Armstrong stuff. Her attorney has filed some motions about her interrogation, and we're going to break down. I got over 200 pages of documents and been sifting through that. Eventually, I'll go through the interview that Colin Strickland gave. But for today, we're just going to kind of break down the argument that her lawyer is making about the interrogation. So just a little recap. We know Kaitlin is accused of killing Mo Wilson on May 11th of this year. She was on the run. Kaitlin was on the run 43 days before being caught in Costa Rica with a new appearance and was extradited back. So the federal judge dismissed the charge of unlawful flight against her, but she could in the future face that charge again if the prosecution deems it necessary. So ultimately what they are wanting is, her attorney is asking the court to suppress statements, observations, and recordings saying Austin police interrogated her illegally on May 12th. If you remember, they arrested her on that misdemeanor warrant they had for her skipping out of the Botox bill. And then she was let go because they thought the birth date was wrong, but it wasn't. It was all a mess. Her attorney says she was not read her Miranda rights and that investigators did not stop questioning after she asked for an attorney. Her lawyer wants all oral statements made by Kaitlin, audio and video recordings of that May 12th interrogation, and any and all law enforcement observations, interpretations, and conclusions formed during that interrogation to be tossed out. They also say that police concocted a misogynistic and fictitious story about her being a jealous partner. So, Travis County DA's Jose Garza's office filed a motion to prohibit comment to the media on Thursday after Armstrong's defense team requested subpoenas and also accused police of failing to read those Miranda rights during that interview. Her attorney actually opposes a gag order, saying that the state's version of events are already public knowledge. So let's go through this. On the day after the offense, officers arrested Miss Armstrong at her home for an unrelated outstanding misdemeanor warrant. The judge of Travis County Justice of the Peace Precinct 5 had signed that warrant April 12th, 2018. So the 2018 arrest warrant, number one, contained Miss Armstrong's full name and date of birth. Number two, accused Miss Armstrong of theft of service, a Class B misdemeanor. And three, was signed by a Travis County Justice of the Peace and contained the seal of that office in the body of the warrant. It was valid on May 12th, 2022, when she was arrested for that. So after arresting her on that 2018 warrant, officers transported Miss Armstrong to Austin Police Department for custodial interrogation. This is the filing, by the way. The subject of the interrogation was not the theft of service offense alleged in the 2018 warrant, but rather the death of Miss Wilson. Once at Austin PD, two armed officers in tactical vests took Miss Armstrong to a small, windowless interrogation room in handcuffs. Officers performed a pat-down search on Miss Armstrong and ordered her to sit in the chair furthest from the door, still in handcuffs. The two officers then left Miss Armstrong in the room and closed the door behind them. About 18 minutes later, Detective Connor entered the room and began custodial interrogation of Miss Armstrong. Within the first 5 minutes of the interrogation, Detective Connor indicated 6 times that Miss Armstrong was under arrest and in custody, and they give examples. You're here for a warrant right now, I guess. That's why you're here. You've got a theft of service warrant. That's why you got picked up today and everything. You got arrested for the warrant portion of it. Because you were under arrest for that portion of it, you got picked up. So that's what the arrest is for. It's very repetitive. So despite Miss Armstrong being in custody, Detective Connor failed to read or provide in writing Miranda warnings required under the Fifth Amendment. Approximately 4 minutes into the interrogation, Detective Connor informed Miss Armstrong that the misdemeanor warrant was invalid. And it quotes, okay, well, good news. So that's what they were just knocking on the door. Apparently, that warrant, the date of birth was wrong. So they had your name, but the date of birth is wrong. So it's to a different person. So that's not, you're not under arrest, okay? However, the warrant for Miss Armstrong's arrest was valid. It had Miss Armstrong's correct date of birth. Detective Connor was wrong. Miss Armstrong remained in custody on a valid arrest warrant for the rest of the interrogation. Detective Connor questioned Miss Armstrong about the May 11th death of Mo Wilson. Armstrong invoked her right to an attorney 3 times during the interrogation, quoting, "Do I need an attorney here? I should have an attorney. I feel like I should have an attorney present." Detective Connor continued to interrogate Miss Armstrong for almost 10 minutes after. And it says Miss Armstrong definitely invoked her right to an attorney. After Detective Connor informed Miss Armstrong she was not in custody, Miss Armstrong asked to leave 5 times. Each time Miss Armstrong asked to leave, Detective Connor blatantly disregarded her request. Below are the instances in which Miss Armstrong asked to leave. And before we go into those, I'm going to throw this graphic up on the screen because in their filing, they did have these pictures of her the day after Mo's murder being brought into that interrogation room. So Detective Connor says, so everything we say in here is just consensual at this point. The door is unlocked. You can leave at any time. Kaitlin says, I would love to leave. Another time she says, I would like to leave, I think. Detective Connor says, you would like to leave? Kaitlin says, yeah, I'd like to leave. I don't actually know, and I would like to leave. Detective Connor says, okay, so that's totally your choice, and the door's open. Then Kaitlin said, I would like to leave if I'm free to leave. In fact, Miss Armstrong was not free to leave at any time. Detective Connor told Miss Armstrong after she was asked to leave, okay, hang tight for just a second. We can't have people just like walking around. It took 11 additional minutes before officers arrived and allowed Miss Armstrong to leave the interrogation room. The interrogation of Miss Armstrong and all evidence obtained from it violated the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment provides that no person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself. The law requires that prior to any custodial interrogation, officers must inform a person of her right to remain silent, that her statements may be used against her, and that she has the right to an attorney. These procedural safeguards are meant to balance the compulsion inherent in custodial surroundings. Compulsion inherent in custodial surroundings. It's Monday. I've had 2 cups of coffee. Need a third. Miranda warnings are required whenever a person is in custody and subjected to express questioning or its functional equivalent. Custodial interrogation is defined as questioning initiated by law enforcement officers after a person has been taken into custody or otherwise deprived of his freedom or action in any significant way. The fact that Miss Armstrong's movement was restricted and she was not free to leave further underscore her custody status. The Court of Criminal Appeals has outlined some general situations indicative of custody, including 1, when the suspect is physically deprived of her freedom of action in any significant way. 2, when a law enforcement officer tells the suspect she cannot leave. 3, when law enforcement officers create a situation that would lead a reasonable person to believe her freedom of movement has been significantly restricted. And 4, when there is probable cause to arrest and officers do not tell the suspect she is free to leave. A court must look at the totality of the circumstances and determine whether a suspect's freedom of movement was restrained to a degree associated with a formal arrest. Detective Connor initially told Miss Armstrong she was going to read her rights, but then Detective Connor got distracted by a knock on the door and failed to follow through with Miranda warnings. After returning her attention to Miss Armstrong, Detective Connor proceeded straight into questioning. Miranda warnings forgotten. The exchange followed. Detective Connor says, so I'd like to talk to you and kind of get a little bit more information on that. But to be able to do that, I have to read you your rights just so that you know and you're protected and things like that. Okay. Kaitlin says, okay. And so if you're reading me my rights, then I should. And Detective Connor interrupts and says, that's because of the warrant. And then Kaitlin Armstrong says, have an attorney. Detective Connor says, because you're under arrest for the warrant, you're technically in custody because of that warrant. So they're 2 separate things. Does that make sense? Kaitlin says, I think so, but I've never heard, and there's knocking at the door. Detective Connor says, oh. Kaitlin Armstrong says, but I've never heard of this warrant before, and I don't know what you're talking about, and they're still knocking at that door. And Detective Connor says, yeah. Kaitlin says, and it doesn't seem like you can give me any information on it. Detective Connor says, so, still knocking. Kaitlin says, you want to read me? Are they knocking here? And Detective Connor says, I think it's for something else. So with the warrant, and then obviously she must go to the door and come back in. It says, so Detective Connor says, okay, well, good news. So that's what they were just knocking on the door. Apparently, that warrant, the date of birth was wrong. So they had your name, but the date of birth is wrong. So it's to a different person. So you're not under arrest. Okay. And Kaitlin says, okay. Detective Connor says, I know it's a little crazy. Yeah. Kaitlin says, they just come to my house and put me in handcuffs for no reason. Detective Connor says, so there was a warrant they thought was you because of the name. So there's some miscommunication on that, but I would really like to talk to you. And Detective Connor continued questioning without any Miranda warnings. Because Miss Armstrong invoked her right to counsel, all responses and subsequent questioning must be suppressed. So this is very interesting. I don't know where this is going to go, but this is going to be interesting to watch, guys, because yeah, that could be an issue. All right, real quick, we're just going to take a moment and have a word from our sponsor of the week that helps me be able to do what I do every day. I'm very grateful for Better Health. That's HEALTH Health. And so, a lot of you guys, I'm sure, are like me when problems arise, that you focus on the problem and not the solution. These things can just overtake your thought process. And we get caught up in day to day life and get used to that struggle. Problem solving mode can totally go out the window when these problems just take over your brain. But when you learn how to find your own solutions, there's no better feeling. And sometimes we need help to learn how to do that. And there have been times where I've reached out for help during difficult times in my life. I'm not ashamed to say it. And sometimes we find that it's easier than we expect. There is a stigma sometimes still attached with going to seek help from a mental health professional. And what we find in the end is the abilities that they give us to cope are life changing. And in the end, I left empowered with strategies that I could have never figured out on my own with the whole mess in my head. And in doing that, I quickly saw a reduction in my stress levels and an improvement in my overall mood. So, if you're thinking of giving therapy a try, BetterHelp is a great option. We've talked about them before. You can do this online, you can do it with video chat, you can do it through text. It's really anonymous, and you cannot imagine some people how this opens a door to get help by not having to leave their home. Some people are simply too depressed to make that call and get in the car and go. It's convenient, it's accessible, affordable, and entirely online. You get matched with a therapist after filling out a brief survey. You can switch therapists at any time if you feel the need. So, when you want to be a better problem solver, therapy can get you there. So, visit betterhelp.com/whattheworld today to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/whattheworld. BetterHelp, HELP.com/whattheworld. Very grateful for them supporting this podcast and also us providing this service to any one person out there that may need it. All right. So back to Kaitlin. So we just mentioned that they want statements, observations, interpretations, and conclusions formed as a result of this interrogation thrown out. He said he also takes issue with statements that the homeowner of the residence where Mo was staying at when she was murdered, because it says Detective I'm going to get this name wrong, y'all. Detective Spittler, who obviously interviewed Mr. Harris, failed to disclose his admitted intoxication and marijuana use at the time of the murder. And even worse, Detective Spittler knowingly misinterpreted his observations. Detective Spittler wrote in the arrest affidavit that Mr. Harris observed a bicycle travel southbound through the alleyway from the apartment on the incident evening. In reality, Mr. Harris never said that he observed a bicycle. He made the following statement about the bicycle, quote, I don't know. I may or may not have. I may or may not have imagined the whisking bike part and having the impression of a southbound bike. But it's like that memory is there, but it's hard for me to testify in a court of law to that only because I didn't effing see it and it could be my imagination. Also, it says technicians with the Austin Police Department laboratory conducted a test fire of I'm going to say this wrong, y'all, Sig Sauer 9mm handgun seized from Mr. Strickland and Miss Armstrong's shared residence. Technicians entered the test-fired cartridge case into the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network. I'm going to call that NIBIN in the future, and compared it to casings found near Miss Wilson's body. Based off a NIBIN investigative lead, Detective Spittler stated in the arrest affidavit that the potential that the same firearm was involved is significant. Detective Spittler's conclusion regarding the probability that the seized firearm was the firearm used in the offense is scientifically unfounded and grossly overstates the significance of a NIBIN investigative lead. In his affidavit seeking arrest of Miss Armstrong, Detective Spittler concocted a misogynistic and fictitious story portraying Miss Armstrong as a jealous woman scorned by Mr. Strickland. The narrative is a lie. As Colin Strickland said, F you guys for manipulating me. They do have all of that interview transcribed in these documents. We will need a whole other episode to do that. So we'll get to that this week, by the way. So what they're requesting now is a Franks hearing, and the Fourth Amendment is violated under Franks. The Fourth Amendment is violated where an officer intentionally or with reckless disregard for the truth includes a false statement in a warrant application. Intentional or reckless omissions of material facts from a warrant application can also furnish the basis for a Franks challenge. When a defendant makes a sufficient preliminary showing that a warrant affidavit includes false statements or one made with reckless disregard for the truth, she is entitled to a hearing to determine the validity of the warrant. The defendant must, number one, make specific allegations in her pleadings of the portion of the affidavit claimed to be false. Number two, provide an offer of proof stating the supporting reason. Number three, establish a preponderance of the evidence that the false statement was made knowingly, intentionally, or with reckless disregard for the truth. It says at the evidentiary hearing, the court must determine, number one, whether the affidavit contains false statements or material omissions. Two, whether the false statements or omissions were made intentionally or recklessly. Number three, whether false statements are removed or the omitted information read in, the remaining affidavit fails to establish probable cause. If, at the conclusion of the evidentiary hearing, the defendant establishes by preponderance of the evidence that a false statement knowingly and intentionally or with reckless disregard for the truth was included in the warrant and without the statement, the affidavit's remaining content is insufficient to establish probable cause, the warrant must be voided and the fruits of the warrant suppressed. So it says I keep wanting to look at this wrong, y'all. Detective Spittler's warrant application was rife with material, deliberate omissions, false statements, and reckless exaggerations. The false statements and statements made with a reckless disregard for the truth fall into these categories. One, the affidavit incorrectly and misleadingly described Miss Armstrong's physical actions and responses during her custodial interrogation and falsely mischaracterized her post-arrest statements. The descriptions in the affidavit are discredited completely by the video recording of the interview, which Detective Spittler has viewed. Number two, the affidavit failed to reveal that the custodial interrogation of Miss Armstrong had been conducted illegally. The interrogating officer failed to failed to read the Miranda rights, y'all. Miss Armstrong and failed to immediately cease questioning when Miss Armstrong repeatedly invoked her right to counsel and repeatedly asked to leave. Number three, the affidavit included an incomplete description and address of the apartment where Miss Wilson was murdered. thereby failing to describe with particulars the location of the crime. Number 4, the affidavit cited to timestamps from an electronic door lock and surveillance camera that Detective Spittler had taken no action to verify. The affidavit relied heavily on these timestamps, which were later determined to be inaccurate. Number 5, the affidavit relied heavily on statements from an anonymous, y'all, I'm like the captain of the struggle bus verbally today. Sorry. The affidavit relied heavily on statements from an anonymous 911 caller who was unreliable and not credible. The affidavit knowingly misrepresented the value of a Nibbin investigated lead on a piece of ballistic evidence. The affidavit exaggerated and overstated the importance of the Nibbin lead, including and misleading the magistrate to place improper weight on its value by stressing the Nibbin lead's significance. So essentially, they're saying that when they tested this cartridge, it's not, I guess it's not 100% yet, but probable. The affidavit, number 7, the affidavit includes many significant false statements about Colin Strickland's interview statements to Austin PD officers. Mr. Strickland gave 2 voluntary interviews before Detective Spittler submitted the warrant application. The affidavit completely mischaracterized and falsely stated Mr. Strickland's words to fabricate a theory of jealousy as a presumed motive for the murder. The affidavit failed to include multiple statements by Mr. Strickland in which he adamantly insisted Miss Armstrong could not have murdered Miss Wilson. Number 8, the affidavit included a false statement about an observation made by a witness named Mr. Harris. The affidavit also recklessly failed to include the fact that Detective Spittler knew the witness had been under the influence of marijuana, aka, and they have it high, at the time he made his observations, a factor directly weighing on the witness's unreliability. If the court sets aside the falsehoods and statements made with a reckless disregard for the truth and takes into account what Detective Spittler intentionally omitted, the affidavit fails to establish probable cause. So they're going big. And look, there's something to be said for fleeing the country with a false passport, going to Costa Rica under a different name and getting your face fixed. But procedurally, if this is proven, this could throw a little rock in it, y'all. The affidavit contains 4 paragraphs detailing Detective Connor's interview of Miss Armstrong on May 12th. The lengthy written description of Armstrong's behavior and verbal statements are blatantly inaccurate, even completely false. Most egregiously, the affidavit falsely claims certain verbal exchanges occurred in the interview that simply did not occur. For example, on page 4, paragraph 4 of the affidavit, Detective Spittler writes that Detective Connor confronted Miss Armstrong with video evidence of her vehicle. The affidavit states Miss Armstrong had no explanation for why her vehicle was in the area the night of the murder. But the recorded video of the interrogation showed that this did not occur. No video. And Miss Armstrong did not lack an explanation. She invoked her constitutional right to remain silent. This is just one example of the way the affidavit falsely portrays Miss Armstrong. These falsehoods are blatant at a minimum. They were made with a reckless disregard for the truth. Detective Spittler has and viewed the video recording of interrogation conducted by his colleague, Detective Connor. They also say the affidavit grossly mischaracterizes her body language during interrogation and contributes to the false portrait of Kaitlin as hostile towards Mo Wilson, guarded, and guilty. They also say this is proven false by video recordings of that interrogation. It says the affidavit relied heavily on 2 different timestamps, those displayed on the electronic door lock and the home security camera. Remember, the timestamps on this surveillance. And we went through this affidavit a few episodes back. So if you haven't listened, you can go back and hear that. But it put her car there like minutes after Mo got home from being out with Colin. It says Detective Spittler took no actions to verify the timestamps from either source were accurate. In fact, they weren't. Detective Spittler waited almost 2 months, 57 days, to update his police report to note the inaccuracies. It says Detective Spittler should have verified the accuracy of such a critical piece of information before citing it and relying on it as fact in the affidavit. His failure to do so is evidence of a reckless disregard for the truth. He also says that the affidavit included statements from an anonymous 911 caller who contacted Austin PD on May 14th. The anonymous caller alleged statements are one of the primary bases for probable cause in the affidavit. The caller is cited as the sole source for and it says false theory that there was a love triangle between Miss Armstrong, Mr. Strickland, and Miss Wilson. The affidavit relies on the anonymous caller to supply a motive for the murder, which is jealousy. Despite the critical importance of this call, neither Detective Spittler nor any other officer took action to investigate or verify the identity of the caller or investigate motivations and biases driving the caller. Instead, Detective Spittler included the unverified, unreliable information to falsely portray Miss Armstrong as a jealous woman with a motive to kill Mo Wilson. He was actually in possession of recordings from other identified 911 callers who, when asked, were unable to verify the information provided by the anonymous caller. So her attorney says that the ballistic test done on the gun retrieved from that search warrant of the home, that the casing was entered into the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network. And it says that those leads are not confirmation of a match and more investigation is needed. He said it provided the false impression in that arrest affidavit that it was appropriate for the magistrate to draw the conclusion from that lead that the handgun seized from Mr. Strickland and Mrs. Armstrong residence was likely used to murder Mo Wilson. Offering the magistrate such a baseless and unscientific conclusion was false and at minimum evidences a reckless disregard for the truth. He said that affidavit inaccurately attributes statements and opinions to Mr. Strickland and relies on these misstatements to claim that Miss Armstrong could have been motivated by jealousy over her relationship with Mr. Strickland as a motive for that murder. In his interview, Mr. Strickland explained that he had seen Miss Wilson on the evening of her murder. He provided significant background information on his short-lived fling with Miss Wilson and his almost 4-year romantic and business relationship with Miss Armstrong. Remember, they owned a business together where they redid these campers, van life, those kind of things, and sold those. It says among the many other positive and adoring descriptions he provided about Miss Armstrong, Mr. Strickland stated in response to multiple different questions that Miss Armstrong was not a jealous girlfriend and he did not believe she could have murdered Miss Wilson. Mr. Strickland never stated that Miss Armstrong was jealous or vengeful. In fact, he said much the opposite several times. The affidavit includes none of this. Instead, the affidavit states that Mr. Strickland told Detective Spittler he had to change Miss Wilson's name in his phone to hide the information from Kaitlin and that Kaitlin had previously blocked Mo's number in his phone. Her attorney says that the affidavit fails to include statements by Colin about Kaitlin. So there's an exchange between Colin and Detective Connor. And they quote that in this filing. Colin says she hasn't specifically mentioned Mo and how, and then it says she hasn't mentioned wanting me to excommunicate her or anything specific like that. Detective Connor said, I thought she went in your phone and blocked her or something. And Colin said, I have no evidence of that. And Detective Connor says, oh, Colin says, I don't know if it's a glitch and then he says, or if that's what happened, honestly. Detective Connor says, what did she block her on? Colin says, what do you mean? Detective Connor says, like, what did she go in and block her, or what got blocked? Colin says, oh, contacts, I think. Detective Connor says, oh, okay, so that's probably not a glitch. Colin says, and then Detective Connor interrupts and says, I think it's pretty safe to say somebody went in your phone and pressed that button. Colin said again, anything is possible. Detective Connor says, and when did that take place? Colin said, I think November or December. So later in the interview, Colin said jealousy by Kaitlin was not specific to Mo Wilson. And so her attorney kind of closes when false statements are excised from the arrest affidavit. The affidavit does not establish probable cause for Kaitlin's arrest. So the bottom line is this. She's actually due back in court this coming Wednesday, the 24th, for a pretrial hearing. She wants a speedy trial. So if that's live streamed, I'm going to be all over that. I will cover that. We will go through that episode, or we will go through that hearing in an episode that evening. So that's kind of all. I wanted to get this out. I know we've been really caught up in the mega series. You guys are loving it. We're growing every day. I appreciate it. Share the podcast, like and subscribe on YouTube if you don't already. That really helps grow the channel. But we're going to keep an eye on this week. I also have some different updates that I'm going to do a little mini episode later today on Alec Murdaugh. Kylie Rodney, unfortunately, I put out a little short video. She was found by the group Adventures with Purpose. Her car was underwater in 14 feet of water, and she was found deceased in there. They're supposed to give a live stream statement today, so I'm going to keep an eye out for that. There'll definitely be an autopsy, so maybe it will answer, what happened. Was she intoxicated? Did she have a medical event? Was this just a terrible accident? So just very, very tragic, not the outcome we ever want for anybody, especially a 16-year-old kid. So anyways, all right, guys, that's it for right now. We will see you later today. Hope you have a good rest of your Monday.
This holiday season, recharge with the Planet Fitness Black Card for just $1 down and $24.99 a month. So instead of fighting a stranger in the mall over a stuffed T-Rex, bring a friend for free and work out on the TRX. Instead of freezing in line for a lame holiday deal, relax in the Black Card Spa with some hydro massage feels. Instead of being trapped at your in-laws, escape to any of our 2,400 Planet Fitness locations. Sign up today for the Planet Fitness Black Card. Just $1 down and $24.99 a month. Cancel anytime. Deal ends November 30th. See Club for details.
With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, banking with Capital One is the easiest decision in the history of decisions. Even easier than choosing to keep the Grinch away from the toy drive.
Who's going to deliver the toys to the kids?
What about me, the Grinch?
No.
Yep, even easier than that.
You steal the presents one time.
With no fees or minimums and no overdraft fees, is it even a decision? That's banking reimagined. What's in your wallet?
Terms apply. Capital One NA, member FDIC. Copyright Dr. Seuss Enterprises. Copyright Turner Entertainment Company.